الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان.
Assalamu alaikum, my friends. Welcome to Revelation Kids. We are now going into Qur'an year 9. This is the third of the ban years. When you get to the top, and you will look back at everything you went through and understand why it had to happen that way. Not because the pain was good, but because it had to happen to turn you into the person that you have become. The believers had been in that valley for almost 3 years. 3 years of hunger, 3 years of isolation, 3 years of trusting that Allah's promise was more real than the empty plates in front of them. And tonight, in Quran year 9, the climb reaches its peak. Over these last few years, something was changing in Mecca. Not among the believers. They had already proven their faith. The change was happening amongst the Quraysh themselves. For 3 years, the people of Mecca had watched their own relatives starve. They had heard the cries of children at night. They had walked past the valley and seen old women huddled in the dust, families who had done nothing wrong except stand by their kinsmen. And slowly, very slowly, the shame began to settle in. How could they call themselves noble when they were starving their own people? How could they boast of the Kaaba when the document hanging inside was a declaration of cruelty? 5 men, 5 Meccans, who were not Muslim by the way, they could not stay silent any longer. They were led by a man named Hisham ibn Amr, and they made a pact with each other that they would stand before the Quraysh and demand the ban be lifted. One of them, a man named Zuhair, was the Prophet peace be upon him's own cousin. He stood up in front of the gathered crowd and declared, "O people of Mecca, are we to eat and clothe ourselves while Bani Hashim perishes, unable to buy or sell? By God, I will not sit down until this evil document is torn up." Of course, Abu Jahl pushed back. Of course he did. He called them weak. He called them fools. He tried to shame them into silence. But one by one, the other 4 men stood up beside Zuhair, and the rest of the Quraysh, the ordinary people who had been watching for 3 long years, finally agreed. Enough was enough. The men went into the Kaaba to remove the document on which the ban had been written, and when they unrolled it, they found something no one expected. The parchment had been eaten by ants. Perhaps termites, but some kind of insect had devoured nearly every word. And all that remained were 3 words at the top. In your name, O Allah. Everything the Quraysh had written, every cruel condition, every threat, every signature of the 40 men who agreed to starve their own family, all of it was gone. Only Allah's name remained. As if Allah himself had erased their cruelty and left behind the only words that mattered. The Quraysh stood there, staring at the ruined parchment. Some of them must have felt a chill run through their bones. 3 years of punishment, and all that survived was God's name. Even after this miraculous sign, many of the Quraysh still refused to believe in the Prophet's message. But the good news was the ban was finally over, and the believers walked out of that valley thinner, wearier, and more exhausted than they had ever been. But they walked out together, and they walked out stronger. Scholars remind us that there is a deep wisdom in why Allah allowed the ban to last 3 years. Why not 3 days or 3 weeks? Because a shorter trial may not have been enough to test the believers to their core, or to turn the hearts of the Meccan public against the very leaders who imposed it. Allah's plan unfolded in His own time, and the responsibility of the believer is to stand firm, trust fully, and know that Allah's plan will always prevail. You know, there's something else that's really important about how this story ends. It's that the ban was not lifted by Muslims. It was lifted by 5 men who did not follow the Prophet, who did not pray the way the believers prayed, who did not recite Qur'an. but they recognized injustice and they could not sit still with it. Scholars point out something powerful about this. Al-Mu'in is one of Allah's names, the helper. He does not only send help through the believers, He sends help through whoever He chooses. A non-Muslim king in Abyssinia wept at the words of Surah Maryam. At that time, he was known as a Christian king. Khadija's non-Muslim nephew smuggled flour in the dark. 5 non-Muslim men risked their reputations to stand up against the ban and say enough. See, the thing is, Allah's support comes from everywhere, and part of being a believer is recognizing it and being grateful no matter where Allah's help comes from. When the believers returned to Mecca, the relief must have been overwhelming. Some of the immigrants from Abyssinia heard the news and came running home, including Uthman and Ruqayya, Abu Salama and Salama. These were some of the most notable companions of the Prophet. This is what the Banyars had built, a community that was strong and for a brief, beautiful moment was all together again. But the story of Qur'an Year 9 doesn't end with just the lifting of the ban. Something else happened, something quieter, but just as important. See, some of the chiefs of the Quraysh had approached the Prophet with a proposition. It was an ask. They said that they might be willing to listen to his message, but only if he sent away the commoners who sat with him. They were talking about the former slaves, the poor, the foreigners, the people who the Quraysh elite looked down upon. Send them away, they said, and we'll come sit with you. The Prophet could have made a calculation. He could have thought, if I accommodate the powerful elite, more people will follow. It would be a good strategic move. It would be smart. But the Qur'an came down with a clear answer. It said to the Prophet, do not send away those who call upon their Lord in the morning and the evening, seeking His approving gaze. If you turn them away, you would become a tyrant yourself. Allah was explaining to the Prophet not to send Bilal away, not to send Khabbab away, or to send Suhaib away, so that a wealthy man could take his seat. In the Prophet's gatherings, peace be upon him, a former slave sat next to a chief's son. A poor shepherd sat next to a wealthy merchant. A teenager sat with an elder. There were no VIP sections. There was no special treatment for the rich. There were no back rows for the poor. See, that was the vision that the Prophet carried. Not just a message about God, but living an example of what a just society looks like. But the Quraysh didn't like this. The elite always looked down on the poor and the ones who had less than them, and their arrogance blinded them to the Prophet's message. What we can say about the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the Muslims, that they showed perseverance. That means not just enduring through hardship, but refusing to compromise their values, even when it would have been easier to bend or give in. This is Qur'an Year 9, the year that the ban was finally broken, the year that 5 brave men stood before the Quraysh and said, enough, the year that the document was found eaten away, all but the name of Allah, the year that the believers came home, and the year that the Prophet showed the world that in his community, every person is equal in the eyes of Allah. Because when you get to the top, and you will, you will see that the climb didn't just test you, it built you. It forged a community that no ban could break, that no hunger could weaken, no arrogance could divide. And Al-Mu'in, the helper, one of the names of Allah, He was there every step of the way, sending help from the places you least expected, through people you didn't even know were watching. Qur'an years 7, 8, and 9 are the ban years. Imagine one letter for each year, B-A-N, ban. Now that the ban is over and the believers are home, we're going to move on to Qur'an Year 10 next. But what comes next is probably the hardest thing the Prophet has ever faced. Not an army, not a battle, but something far more personal. I look forward to seeing you guys all in Qur'an Year 10. Out of breath and all alone.
إن الذين قالوا ربنا الله ثم استقاموا فلا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون أولئك أولئك أصحاب الجنة خالدين فيها جزاء بما كانوا يعملون.